Hi, thanks for joining us today. My name is Amanda Gustin, and I'm the Director of Collections and Access at the Vermont Historical Society. Today we're going to talk about an item from our collection that represents a huge chunk of my own personal childhood. And when I tell you I was over the moon excited to learn that we hold this in the collections of the Vermont Historical Society, I cannot overstate that enough. So what we have before us and what we're going to talk about today is the final typescript manuscript with author's notations of Marguerite Henry's book, Gustin Morgan Had a Horse. Now, you may have read this book as a child. It's a standby for Vermont historical fiction. It tells the story of the first Morgan horse, how that horse came to Vermont, the boy, Joel Goss, who loved the horse and who stayed with him throughout his entire life. And in between, it weaves in a whole lot of early Vermont history. So Marguerite Henry was born in 1902 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and when she was 6 years old, she contracted rheumatic fever, and that kept her bedridden most of the time until she was 12 years old, so a really tough childhood. While she was in bed, she couldn't do much else but read and write and dream, and so she began writing stories, and she particularly loved writing stories about animals, especially horses and dogs. She actually sold her first short story when she was 11 years old and was always determined from then on to be a writer. Now, she married and sort of took a side route for a little while, but she kept up writing, selling short stories and poems and things like that to magazines until she sold her first novel in 1940. Gustin Morgan Had a Horse represents her first book about horses. Now today she's known as a children's book author. You may be familiar with other works like Misty of Chincoteague, King of the Wind, The White Stallions of Lapisa, and others like that. But this book, Gustin Morgan Had a Horse, is the first time she ever set out to write an historical fiction book about a particular horse, and that would become one of her hallmarks. She actually did a lot of research for this book. We have also a pamphlet from our collections here that's meant as a publisher's advertisement for this book, which ends up coming out in 1945, in which Henry writes a short essay about all of the correspondence she had with people in Vermont, librarians at the University of Vermont, the Fletcher Free Library, and the Vermont Historical Society. She also carried on a personal correspondence with Helen Hartness Flanders about the music that might appear in this book, because of course Gustin Morgan was himself a singing master, among other things. So she did a lot of thinking and a lot of historical research to put into this book, but she also did some imagining as well. If you've read the book, you know it's got some fanciful pieces, and of course it's a very heavily fictionalized treatment of the story of this first Morgan horse and his life. So this first edition appears in 1945. We've also got a first edition here to show you with illustrations by Wesley Dennis. And this is the first time Marguerite Henry and Wesley Dennis worked together. Of course, Wesley Dennis is famously going to do many of her later books with these gorgeous color illustrations on the cover and a ton of sketch illustrations throughout the book that I know I can't picture a Marguerite Henry book without a Wesley Dennis illustration. So this final typescript copy is, as I said, really special because it has a lot of her just final tweaks to what is essentially a largely finished manuscript. She typed it out and then she wrote in pencil a couple of word changes here and there. Some pages are almost entirely untouched, other pages are very heavily edited, and she felt that this should live in Vermont, so she mailed it to the Vermont Historical Society in the late 1940s after the book was finished and out there in the world. She actually received her first Newbery Medal nomination for this book in 1946. She would win a few years later for her book King of the Wind. Having this manuscript in the collections of the Vermont Historical Society is really special because I know a lot of us grew up with this book and this story and these characters as part of our own childhoods, and it's very much become part of the sort of literary imagination of the state of Vermont. So we're really grateful that Marguerite Henry thought to bring this back to Vermont so that we could have it here for people to study and to look at her writing process and to think about how she went about shaping the story of this important historic horse into this children's fiction book that was able to communicate history to so many people and maybe instilled a love of history in some of them just like me. Thanks for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about the collections of the Vermont Historical Societies and what else we hold, you can visit us at vermonthistory.org or follow us on social media.